go ahead and call this meeting to order and declare a quorum of 4 members present. We'll start workshop session C1, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the 2017-18 budget development. Dr. Ely.
Thank you, Dr. Yoke and members of the board. Our first item up for this afternoon is to talk about the progress we've made in the development, excuse me, the 2017-2018 budget. Just a reminder, we started this process in March, and it continues through until August. And by August, we will have to, excuse me, finalize the budget and set a tax rate, which we are planning to do at the regular scheduled board meeting in August. This is complicated this year by it being a legislative year, and it's also complicated a little bit by having a special session. Chuck, this is not on? Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. We're in the black. But with more information on the budgets, Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Dr. Ely. No, it didn't in 1 month, Mr. Schaefer, go from red to black. I apologize, but I'll go ahead and give you that preview now. Budget timelines. Typically this month we come forward with the compensation plan, but as Dr. Ely mentioned, due to the legislative session and the pending special session, we thought best to hold off to July. So at the July board meeting, we'll be coming forward with a compensation plan for next school year, as well as an update regarding values. The final values for BCAT are due to us on Monday, July 24th, which is the Monday after our July board meeting. However, we should be getting pretty close prior to that 18th day. So we should have a good indication of what our local revenues look like by that point in time. I can tell you as of yesterday, of the 10 billion total grand total value we received from an appraisal district, 3 billion was still under review. So it makes it very difficult to project out very much with such a significant number under review at this point in time. But it also, as Dr. Ely mentioned, board meeting in August will come forward with proposed budget for the board's consideration and the appropriate tax rate. We are tracking nicely due to our increased local growth with our projected INS rate that we had used earlier this spring when we sold the second half of our 2015 bonds. We began the process early this semester. Grand total of new personnel requests. This is just kind of a review from previously. New personnel requests from out the district for consideration totaled 4.3, and exceptional items just shy of $2 million. And that's consistent since last board meeting. The approved additions we went through in detail with the board last month included just shy of $814,000 of new personnel. Pecan Trail was tracking just under 1.4 million to get it open and staffed, and we had approved a little over 100,000 in exceptional item requests from throughout the district. This is from our May meeting. We used 2.9% as far as projected enrollment growth from our demographers, 9% increase on local revenue. I had at that time set aside $1.65 million for salary adjustments. This is Pecan Trail and the new positions added together that I just spoke about a few minutes ago. That totaled 2.2, and that brought us in at a $3.6 million deficit last month. The primary driver behind the steps that I'll go into here in the next slide, but we are going from zero recapture to projection of 5.7 million recapture to the state next year. So as preparing for this month, I think this broad stroke and look at things gives you it's very eye-opening as far as the state of our current funding system for public ed. If you look at the year we're in, or we're wrapping up 16-17 school year, our local revenue brought in $87.5 million for us. From the state revenue side, the main drivers are the foundation and the available school funds, and those totaled 8.25 for us. There are other revenue components, but these are the big ones, and this is just an example I wanted to share with you. Those total 95.81. We look into this year using the 9% that I did last month. That increases that revenue, our local side, to 95.45, about 7.8 million increase. As our local goes up, the state reduces their contribution to things, and we're projected this next year for 7.37 million. You take in consideration our recapture payment, because as our property values have gone up nicely the last couple of years, our enrollment growth slowed down a little bit. You add these numbers together, you get a 97.12 for our revenue. The point in all this being is, yes, we see a significant increase in local values, but when you take in consideration the change in state revenue, recapture payment, we really only keep in pocket a little over $1 million of that. And I think that was, I knew that was occurring, but I think this example really, it just kind of opened your eyes as to the current funding system the state utilizes to fund public ed. So if you think about this, and I just mentioned Pecan Trail, it's going to cost us about $1.4 million. If you take that in consideration, we're already at the minus as we move forward before we look at salary adjustments or new positions. But I think this kind of gives you a good example, even though we're seeing that 9%, what the net effect is after the state adjusts their contributions and we take care of recapture payment. I'm not counting on any real change, Mr. Schaefer. I have prepared ours as though nothing's going to change. I think the House made a valid effort with House Bill 21. However, I think at that point in time, politics began to get in the way, just my own personal narrative. So I'm not, I don't have tremendous expectations for anything along the lines of school funding to shift in the special session, to be quite honest.
So yeah, the budget is passed, and so that won't change. The only thing that has been talked about in regards to public education is the governor has said he would like for the special session for both chambers to consider passing on a raise to teachers that would not come from additional state funds, but it would need to be carved out of existing district revenue or existing resources. So the potential changes that could come from the legislature would only increase the burden on local school districts, including this one, and don't see anything that would add money into the system because it's not part of what is purported to be the governor's call. Now we're still waiting for the proclamation from the governor to come out to see what all is going to be on there. But based on his press conference and what he's said he wants on the special session, and he's the one who gets to decide. He's the only one who can decide what they talk about. It doesn't look like any relief would be coming to any school district.
And is it not true that the last time that the state did something like that and made a mandate on a salary increase across the board, that it was at that time on top of any kind of local salary adjustment that had been approved by a school board? So if, in an example, we were to go ahead and approve the 2% or that we have in the budget now, that could be, we would be required to also add additional funds if the state so approved that.
So the devil is in the details, so it's all in how the legislation is written that ultimately passes. And so the last time that happened was 2009, 2011. I can't exactly remember which legislative year it was, but the way the law was written at that time, school districts did have to pass on raises that were approved by the legislature on top of what they had already done. So that's one of the reasons why we're holding back one more month to make a decision on this. We want to see what pre-filed legislation looks like. The special session is set to open on July the 18th, which is also our July board meeting day. So we won't know what's progressing through the through the special session, but we will know at least what pre-filed legislation looks like there. Incidentally, the last time this happened as well, the state did provide additional funding, at least in the first year of the biennium, to be able to offset the effect of those additional raises. What has been talked about at this point is no additional funding coming from the state to offset that.
Can you tell us what, if they did let's say $1,000 per teacher requirement, that we add that and that we come up with the money for it on top of what we've already budgeted, what would the impact of that be?
So we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 940, 950 teachers, counselors, nurses, and librarians. And oftentimes when they do this, when they talk about teachers, they talk about those 4 job classes. So a good order of thumb is $1 million.
Yeah. So if we have, in a few slides, a negative 3.6 or a $3.6 million deficit, we would in essence be looking at a $4.6 million deficit.
Perhaps.
If that were
under a scenario in which a $1,000 raise would be passed, that would have to be borne out by local school districts. That is a possibility.
I got one more question. When you talked a minute ago about the last time this happened, and they did it for the first year of the biennium, was that after the budget was approved or before the budget was approved?
That was not during a special session.
Okay.
So that was legislation that happened during the regular session. So it was a part of that money got rolled into House Bill or Senate Bill 1, whatever the budget bill was at that time.
So typically, if there's a special session, they're not going to readjust the budget or reapprove or make amendment to the budget. Is that
in
kind
my
of sort of?
experience? I have not seen them do that, and we haven't had too many opportunities like this. So I would yield to people more seasoned than me that are better watchers of the legislature than I for a more exact answer. But I have not heard of that.
I was trying to get a positive feeling on that. I guess I'm not.
it's exactly the opposite of positive.
I was trying to look for that.
The one thing that the legislature has to do while it's in session is pass a budget, and they have done so. And it's met, it's obviously met the needs, or it's been voted out of both houses. And I guess the governor signed it. So I would find it hard to believe that additional funding would come, but I don't know. We will watch and see.
There's always hope, Mr. Schaefer. As we move into this month, Cabinet, we approved an additional 157,000 of new positions. So that pulled that number up to 971. Those positions were, we have full day pre-K this year, a class of that. This is for the teacher and an assistant. That was grant funded this past year. The funding is no longer available. We want to commit to that with local revenue for 1 more year so we can evaluate its effectiveness and then go forward after this year and determine whether that becomes a regular part of our budget. But this is to pay for a full day pre-K teacher and an assistant to replace the grant funding that is no longer available to fund that current. It's how it's being funded currently. An additional half position at Consolidated and an administrative assistant for our new Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Trammell. Pecan Trail holds steady. Did add 11,000 to our exceptional item request. This is just part of us getting our budget situated as we transition from school resource officers to school resource deputies. Or move to the detail page. Here are the big numbers as far as the adjustments from May to June. I did move our local revenue projections up from 9 to 9.3. As I mentioned, a third of the total value is still under review at this time. I think it'd be unwise for me to be too aggressive with those projections until some more things come out from under review. This generated I think it was right around an additional $300,000 for us, or $250,000. Salary adjustments, because of several of the things that we just discussed regarding salaries, did in essence take this add on the revenue from our local revenue and try to build some additional capacity into the money that we have set aside for salary adjustments, whatever that ultimately looks like in July. That allows us to do whatever percentage we may offer if the special session or the direction we get from the state dictates what we do with teacher salaries. It allows us the option to pursue some equity adjustments into the more competitive market schedules that TASB shared with us. Just with more capacity, it allows us more options to try to take care of our folks and go ahead and earmark that money now before moving into July. This is the additional 157,000 of new positions that I've mentioned to you, and the extra 11,000 for the radios. Before I move to the detail page, another piece that kind of motivated adding some capacity with possible salary adjustments were the updates on insurance premiums. I'll kind of walk across an example, and then you can kind of interpret the rest of the chart yourself. For employee only, for those employees on TRS, the high deductible, their increased monthly cost is in the red. So those folks that have this particular plan, employee only, their increased out of pocket will be $10 a month. This tells us how many of our employees participate in that particular program. You can follow this across. Those that are on the Select, Active Care Select, for employee only will go up $30 a month, and so on and so forth across with the number of people participating in those particular plans also listed. If you look at the number of participants, I can tell you that employee and employee plus children accounts for 85% of our employees that use insurance through us. So a majority of our folks take employee only or employee children. Yes, we not only have the TRS, but we have the Scott and White and First Care as well. You can see the increases for those plans as well as also with the number of participants. So with that in mind as well is why I kind of pursued some additional capacity and salary adjustments, whether that translates to actual salaries or visit the idea of trying to do a little bit with our current contributions. It allows us that option as we move into July to consider what may be most effective for the most of our people. So,
Curiosity question on the different healthcare plans with all the changes in healthcare the last 2-3 years. Have you seen a particular jump from one particular plan to the other, or is everybody pretty much staying the same? Or is that a question that you would not have?
I think
Yes,
the
people,
TRS.
the increase in the cost of healthcare globally, nationwide, and including in the state, is causing families to make lots of different decisions regarding healthcare. You see out there the richest, if you will, plan is TRX Active Care 2. There used to be a 3. They don't even offer that anymore. As these rates rise, these premiums rise, it is causing more and more to move to employee only, those who have the options of getting insurance elsewhere, and it's driving more and more people to the Active Care 1 HD. TRS is trying to figure out how to manage all of the school people they have in the state and make sure they can provide coverage for them with the amount they get from the state, from the districts, and from the employees. And so they are charged with trying to figure out a way that can still provide insurance that's affordable for people. What this chart does not show is the increase in out-of-pocket expenses, increase in deductibles, and other things that are going along, those changes that are being made year over year that we can't really even summarize right here. But the whole nature of healthcare is changing. It's driving people who have better options to go to those other options, and those to the plans that they can afford, which are often Active Care 1 HD and maybe one or two of the HMOs that we have on the other page.
So you think there's quite a few people going to the TRS Active Care?
Yes, and I would imagine that we will have even more this next year that will migrate that way. At some point, school district board can provide some additional help both with salary and both with additional contributions towards healthcare. At some point, some of these increases in premiums are so much that it's still forcing families to make decisions on which is the most adequate coverage for them and their family based on their situation.
Okay, I have a rather basic question.
Mike is the basic question.
Yeah, this should be an easy one. Monthly, they're in parentheses. How many months? Are you using 12?
Yes, sir. So basically, on an annual salary, you can take that, multiply it by 12. I was just doing some math. For example, if an employee, any particular employee, $1,000 raise, and you divide that out by your $1,283 you're going to clear, you can see what this would do to that overall. I can tell you, it's just from your question, Mr. Schaefer, that personally, myself and my family were on the TRS plan last year and moved to actually I moved my family to Scott and White just because the premiums were more affordable at that time. So I do think it begins to make people make certain decisions, fair or not. But just want to kind of give the board kind of a background as to why part of the reason I felt the need to try to build more capacity and what our options could be as far as salary adjustments, what we had earmarked moving into that projection.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that one of those decisions is people not having insurance coverage beyond employee only. That's what some of those cost structures, one TRS, that's
Yes, sir.
$400 a month increase.
It's $4,800. Absolutely. With all of that in hand, our detailed page for this month, we did finish the year out a little bit higher. I had 1.75 as we closed out the end of the school year and got final numbers for the school year. We were able to bump this up a little bit. Had a little impact on our number for 16-17. But continue to use 2.9 as our projected growth next year. I mentioned the 9.3, so that took us up about $250,000 approximately on the revenue side. We gained a little bit of revenue also on our foundation from the previous projection, or we were provided an update to run our projections since our last board meeting. That adjustment or extra revenue is basically we received funding for new instructional facilities. The state did increase that per student a little bit, so it gave us a little bit more money there originally than we were projecting in May. In essence, I took this increased revenue and carried a vast majority of it into increasing our capacity with payroll adjustments or salary adjustment considerations as we prepare for July and whatever we bring forward to the board. So I moved this from a 1.6 to a 2.1. Intermediate and new, that went from 2.2 to 2.3. That includes the positions I mentioned earlier. So in essence, we're kind of holding from where we were before. It was 3.6, a little over 3.6, holding us at 3.5 at this point in time. Recapture still running just shy of $6 million.
I think Dr. Weston would be very pleased with the $50,000 increase in interest earned. Investment report. He would be excited about that.
Hopefully they do a little bit more later, but that's exactly. So definitely had the option to allow some of this extra projected local revenue, which I don't think is finished at this point in time, but to draw this down. But at the same time, I thought considering number of things that lie on the horizon as far as insurance premiums in the special session, it might be wise to provide a little more capacity in our salary adjustments number, just to position ourselves accordingly as we, again, prepare to bring compensation package to the board next month. And this translates to our graph. Our golden line is, excuse me, it chokes me up. Yeah, it's basically our take notice line is 17.5% of our adopted cash flow. These are our projected fund balance each year as we project out. The red were the projections when we adopted our budget last August. So you can see coming out 2021, we're just shy of that 17.5% mark. The green line, we've improved upon significantly. That was the first one we started talking this year. That was that 5.4 million deficit we came out of the gate with. The blue is the current projection now. So with that extra 0.3% on local projections, it allowed things to start kind of stabilizing and flattening out in the out years. So with that, kind of lots of moving pieces. To kind of summarize it, we're holding steady at this point in time with lots of information yet to come. I think the picture will be much more clear come July, but lots of things to consider. Yeah.
Is the gold line 17.5% cash flow? Is that the TASB recommended line for fund balance?
TASB recommends 2 months or 3 months?
3.
3 months is no, it's not.
Okay, so that's our.
That's what we need for cash flow.
Sure.
It's not that.
It is the cautionary line.
Well, it's the, if we go below it, we may have to have.
We potentially could have to go and borrow money, tax anticipatory notes.
That. Will you back up one? As I look through that, to obtain those numbers on our projections, I see some of the, I'll say, assumptions you've made, which all look pretty reasonable, but I want to note for these guys up here on the payroll cost increase for the 18, 19, 19, 20, and 2021 years, we have 1.25% there, which is not a healthy number. I'll put it that way. And it's a very conservative number.
I got it. Well, and what we are looking to accomplish, Mr. Harris, excellent point, is traditionally or for the last number of years, the raises have been done through a percentage, a flat percentage off the salary. What we are attempting to do or considering this year with the equity adjustments and moving into the salary schedules that TASB is proposing for us that's more reflective of our comparative group, then we may very well, the calculation of this as a 1.5 existing payroll may begin to look differently, because we may start calculating our raises in a different manner as opposed to just a flat percentage off of existing salary. But before we can do, and I think it will make us more efficient long run when we look at raises, but we have to get ourselves to the more competitive salary schedules first, because it's been some time since those have been done.
So what this is, that's in essence, the 1.25 is a percentage increase. Now those dollars may be allocated differently than a straight line application of that percentage. Somebody may have a 2% raise for their personal sake, and somebody may have no raise, depending on where they fall in that salary study. Is that?
So that's just 1.25% of all of our 6,100 costs, which is which is salary, benefits, insurance, taxes, all that part in there. And so that's just kind of a rough number to have a number in there, a placeholder value.
Is that not what we've traditionally I mean, one of the things that Mr. Martindale has done on the next slide is shown comparisons of where we are today versus what we actually approved a year ago. And so we have to keep some of the assumptions the same, right? But I think you make a good point. That's a percent amount increase in the payroll cost. It doesn't say it's an increase per person. The other thing we have to keep in mind is when you look at what we're using is forecasting forward for our property taxes as well.
That's what I was.
Is, you know, the fact that we're trying to be conservative and be consistent with what we've done in the past so that we can look at, is that line changing its trajectory or is it not? You know, because we have to acknowledge that a lot of the things we don't know, but at least we're using the same assumptions from year to year as we go forward.
So thank you, Dr. Yokin. I appreciate that. And that's exactly right. These are conservative numbers right here, and these are green because they did change from last time. And so these will change in the out years as other things become apparent. And those are conservative, as are these right here. So the two revenue driving numbers are our average daily attendance of our students and our local property taxes. So what typically happens as we have done this the last several years is the out years look a little bleak, and then we add students and we add property values, and all of a sudden these come up and we're able to do many of the things that we need to do this year included. And so that's, but what we don't want to do is just put zeros along the way. We want to make sure we have placeholder amounts here. Another thing that we're trying to do is increase as we go along money into capital outlay to be able to do more and more in-house without having to go to bond elections. So those are some of the things, these are some of the numbers that we massage as we.
Well, and you also have the placeholders, pardon me for interrupting, for the middle school and the new elementary school as well. So the fact that we're kind of putting those in there, I think is important for everybody to realize as well.
And we build in utilities into our contracted services part as well.
Well, and I think also you said the out years look bleak. 2020 looks pretty good up there because we're not opening a school and the deficit goes away. So, yeah, when you can catch your breath and not open a new school, you get to have your budget rebound a little bit too.
So we lived for a number of years on increasing student enrollment, adding an elementary school every 3 or 4 years. We got to that point in our 5th through 8th grade that we were out of room in our 4th, 5th through 8th grade campuses. So adding our 3rd intermediate, our 3rd middle, our 9th, and now our 10th elementary, opening 5 schools in 5 years, we're in the hard part of this. Once we get through this building phase, this near-term building phase, and we're just adding elementaries every once in a while. The way the system is constructed, by if you get more students, you get more resources, more money, then it will be working out more to our favor at that point.
I think what's also we have to keep in mind is 1920 is a new legislative session. So there's always the possibility of what might occur there as well.
The Aggies might win the World Series someday too, but
That's true. That's very good, Dr. Additional questions?
Anybody else? Thank you for that. Thanks. We'll move on to C2, consideration, discussion, possible action related to board policy FC local related to school boundary adjustment. And just to give a summary to recall where we've been, particularly since there was the article in the newspaper this week. In January, we started our discussion. In February, we discussed why it was important so that it was clear to the constituents and to ourselves why we felt like we needed to have an actual policy in place, as one does not exist. I mean, one of the things that becomes very difficult without having a policy in place is people have a tendency to say, this is how we've always done things in the past, And the way that is represented is not always accurate. Some of the way people remember things perhaps is not the way it actually happened. We've asked for feedback from the board on a number of times. Last month, we had a really rich discussion on some of the intricacies on the process and what we thought was important. We also talked a lot about what we thought were the key trigger points that action needed to take place. And so based on the feedback that we gave the administration, they went back and provided a document which Mr. Harris is going to go over with us a little bit, in that he went back to make sure that our wheres and therefores were in the appropriate order. And so if you might, Mr. Harris, kind of walk us through, that would be great.
I'd be happy to. The gist of it is really kind of, I mean, as she said, what we talked about last time, I think. Let's just kind of turn through it so we can talk about it from a 30,000 foot view, and then I can maybe along the way highlight a few things that I thought we might need to have more discussion on, or that I thought people might want to flesh out a little bit more, or maybe change. First is kind of a general statement about the attendance boundaries. Then there's kind of the next two sections, kind of primary considerations, things that are very important historically to the decision making that we have used. And so those are listed there in items 1 through 4. And then what follows are other things we consider. And these are, I don't want to say less important, because they're all very important. Things like creating opportunities for proximity or neighborhood schools so that kids can walk or ride a bike safely. And all of those types of factors are listed there, down to local infrastructure. Some of these sites are just flat out different because of where they're located and what the roads are like, or things that we don't think too much about, or at least I don't. You guys in construction probably do. Things like sewer capacity or other utility infrastructure that's at a site. So there are some limitations in that regard as well. On page 2, kind of there in the middle, this gets to the crux of the process. What this says is every year in December, the administration will take those primary considerations in that list of other factors and do an analysis and figure out where do we sit, or where do we stand on utilization of our schools. Do we need to move students around? Do we need to build new schools? Do we need to change programming? Things like that. And then what they'll do is come and report to the board. So that's kind of the general process that's put in place. You'll see the first item there is facility utilization. What we talked about were some trigger points on utilization, and this is really underutilization and overutilization. We talked about having some trigger points that would cause the administration to notify the board of usage at a facility. And what I tried to do in the draft we had, it was a little bit unclear as to whether it was a 15% plus or minus from 100 range or 10. So I tried to use it so that it would trigger the notice to the board in the broadest situation, if you will. So it would trigger that sooner. So 85% for the underutilization, and then the 110 for the overutilization. Now, this is not, to me, to say that if let's say a school is at 109% of building capacity, that should cause either the board or the administration to make a decision that, well, we're fine, if that's not the case on the ground. I mean, I trust that in their annual review, they'll look at the the actual site, and that's where you start getting into capacity and core capacity. And that's one of the things, by the way, I think we should flush out. I mean, you know, a school that may be at 109%, that may mean something different if it's an older campus that has kind of more narrow halls or a little bit lower lunchroom square footage versus like right now where we have College Station High School, that its core capacity is built out for a bigger student population. So those numbers, they mean different things in different settings, but the idea is to say, hey, let us know, and we put in some numbers to say, if you're here, we for sure want to know. That doesn't mean don't tell us if there's an issue somewhere else. Okay. The next one is comparable composition. That is something we spend a lot of time on anytime we're adjusting boundaries. So what this is an attempt to deal with that issue. And I think you'll see there, what we talk about are kind of some basic benchmarks, and I don't know if these are the right numbers for us to settle on, but this is kind of what we talked about last time. And there's a breakout between 5 through 8 and then 9 through 12. And we put an asterisk there. We'll come back and talk about one of the issues I think we might look at, and it relates to one of our primary considerations. I'll go ahead and do it now. For elementary schools, the way we've traditionally done it is we have, I think it's 3 elementary schools that have historically higher percentages of low SES students. And the idea there is that we designate those as our quote, Title I campuses, and we then can make use of some of the other things that we'll talk about, the alternatives to boundary adjustment to deal with those needs from a programming standpoint. But I think we might want to flush that out a little bit on page 1, primary consideration number 1, because there's no distinction there that we've historically made use of for the elementary schools. Okay, back to intermediate and middle. For the comparable composition, we've got 15 percentage points as in our difference. So if one school's at 20 and the other's at 35, what we say is, okay, if you're greater than that, you lack comparable composition. And then to pull a completely arbitrary number out for a range, I put 5% and said if we're in the 10 to 15 range, that's when we trigger, quote, additional consideration or analysis. That's when we really, hey, we need to watch this so we don't hit what we consider to be a lack of comparable composition. We'll get down there because I think that's one of the things we need to do more work on. For the high schools, and by the way, if we're below 10, we think that is comparable composition. For the high schools, it was 12, and then again, the arbitrary 5 percentage point range, so 7 to 12 being our action zone or further study zone.
If you recall, last month, we wanted kind of a red, yellow, green kind of thing, and so that, I think what Mr. Harris is done is gone ahead and identified what that yellow zone would be, and we felt had some really strong discussion, rich discussion last month on what red would be as far as in the red zone, and I think that if you go back and look at your notes, that's where we got the 15 and 12, but by allowing to identify a lower boundary, that does help us give what that yellow zone is going to be so that we're actually looking at things before perhaps it becomes a real issue.
Yes. Yeah,
I think part of that is for the 5 through 8, you're comparing among 3 campuses. For 5 through 12, for 9 through 12, excuse me, you're comparing between 2 campuses. And also once you get to the 9th through 12th grade level, there's some of the indicators for students who are from poverty kind of level out a little bit, and some folks do not take advantage of free and reduced lunch, and so we see traditionally smaller numbers at both of our comprehensive high schools in those areas. So I think that's kind of a nod to both of those phenomena.
Okay. The question that I think we might want to grapple with a little bit here is, if we're in that yellow zone, what does it mean? And that gets into the next set of items presented, kind of the alternative student enrollment options. One of the things that I did add to the list is differential staffing. That was one of the things that we talked about 2015, when we really had some in-depth discussions about comparable composition. But there are other things, programming, classroom size, capping enrollment, limiting transfers, things like that, that the administration does, that are all options on the table for them without redrawing lines on a map. And to me, that is part of that yellow zone. And then probably part that they would also consider, and part the board considers, is, okay, what does the growth look like, both low SES and non-low SES growth within a zone? What do we need to do in terms of projecting out? And if there is a need for boundary adjustment, when do we do it, and how do we do it? And coincidentally, that triggers into...
So on the alternate student enrollment options, number 5, capping enrollment at that campus. So that is, what stage is it? That's the yellow stage?
I don't know that these translate necessarily to yellow, green, red options. What I think they do is they show 2 different levels of disruption to the community and to the system in doing this. So the first one, which is limiting some transfers in and out, adding additional staffing or differentially staffing, moving some programs, putting some temporary classrooms in there, perhaps capping enrollment. Those are the things that we can do that won't really, we won't need additional funding for building new facilities to do that or to change attendance lines. So it won't impact the entire system. Could impact the budget, but that's would come and be the first level. And perhaps that's something we look at as we start getting in that near-term range. And again, the key important point of this is an annual look at this every year. We're not waiting 5 years or 7 years for something to sneak up on us. So we'll be able to see those coming. The facility utilization options.
Can you explain a little bit more? Give me an example, like on number 5.
We could say at College Hills Elementary, they have 765 kids, and they really just don't have space for any more. So next kids that come in, they're going to go to Pebble Creek Elementary or Southwood Valley Elementary or somewhere where we have space, and we'll provide the transportation for folks if we need to do that.
And I can tell you my understanding of that, limited as it might be, would be like, let's say we have a dual language program housed at one of our elementary schools that has an overcrowding problem. Well, they might limit enrollment in that program based on the enrollment cap at that campus. So preference might be given to people who are already at that campus. Or if let's say we have a district employee who might want their child to go to that campus because they have taken a job in the district or moved to that campus. Well, there might be the ability to say, well, you can't because we're full. We're literally over capacity. Things like that they have, and those are just 2 examples, and they may not do that. But what it is, it's when you have these people moving in or coming into a school who are living out of that school's attendance boundary, or if people move in and live in that attendance boundary but haven't enrolled yet, when they go to enroll. Is that saying it right?
Yes.
Excuse the expression, for me at that point, the ox is in the ditch.
You got it. I mean, and that's, the whole point is to try to deal with a bad situation, and these are just some of the tools we have. But at the end of the day, we still have to keep educating kids, and we can't have a classroom in the hallway. So we'd have to do something, and that's the effort here, is to empower these guys. And it's an option. Again, the next option, facility utilization options.
Sure.
See number one on that.
And again, the administration may consider options, including but not limited to these. So these are just some examples of, and we've done a number of these things. We've done differential staffing. We've moved programs once in a while. We utilize, obviously, temporary classrooms at schools. We have not done this one in the past, but it is, as we continue to get bigger and grow in different places, sometimes at unexpected times, I think this is another, tool and tool belt that we could possibly do, and that could perhaps forestall the more disruptive options, which are down here.
And it's not just unique as a possibility within the school district if we were to go ahead and approve this, that a lot of the fast growing districts in the state are acknowledging to the parents, we're trying to, as Mr. Harris said, focus on being sure we're educating your child, and we don't think having your child sit in the hall is probably the best way. We will work with you if you move to our school district to be sure that you're getting the kind of education you're expecting from the school district.
And I'm aware of some districts doing it, but just the word, and I can see where it would be done, but I know that at the end of the day, that's probably one of the big things that I noticed when I was reading this.
Well, and I mean, there's a reason we haven't done it before. I mean, and there's a recognition of that and what it would mean. But, and just to be clear, I mean, to me, it's my understanding that this is not either a prioritized list. I mean, just because there's an item listed as one, that doesn't mean it's a higher priority than number two. And then the other thing is, there's no requirement that they march down the list and do any of them. I mean, they might say, best option is let's proceed to facility utilization option number one, which is adjusting boundaries. And I mean, historically, as we have schools get full, they do some work to try to mitigate the impact with these others, but that's ultimately where we go, and we've seen it a lot. And we've seen the impact on our budget with all those new school openings. So that's.
And I think it's important when we're talking about just having, this is the first time we put a policy together. I think it's important to have some of the awareness that some of the decisions are not really palatable, but there are things that you could do, because it is a case where without outlining those in a non-emotional, non-stressful environment, so that we're trying to do that now and we're not actually moving kids around, that it's clear that we've looked at all the options before we go through, as Mr. Harris talks about, going through an initiation of a boundary change.
And I think, and I don't think there's a better word than capping. I mean, capping is capping. But when you look at that word compared to a lot of the other, I guess, adjectives.
And I will tell you, it was not my intent to hide the ball.
No. I agree.
As ugly as that process would be, I mean, when you run through it in your mind, yeah, it could be that. If somebody moves in across the street from an elementary school that's full and little Johnny doesn't get to go there, yeah, that would be bad. But I mean, it is a tool that they could use. Hopefully they won't, but it's there and it's an option. Okay, the next facility utilization options. That is those 4 items listed there. The ones we've used are 1 and 3. Hopefully 1 and 4. Hopefully we don't have to get to 2 very much. That's some of the painful case studies that we've studied and read about. And then there's the boundary adjustment process. What this is an idea that we discussed. It changes it a little bit. Well, that's not true. It changes a lot. It basically says what's going to happen is if there's a decision to be made or made to adjust boundaries, one, it's going to be based on those considerations and principles set out in the policy. But what's going to happen is the administration comes to the board with some options. They go through those items listed there. And then the board takes it and works. The board is given a lot of flexibility how to proceed. You'll see that there's a requirement that there is at least one community forum. I think our practice has been to receive input from the community at multiple forums. But the other thing there, you'll see the board shall also, stop right there, gather feedback from the public through email or other means determined to be appropriate. That's one of the things in our latest process that I found really helpful, because what I did is wasted a bunch of paper and killed a lot of trees, because I printed all of them out and then grouped them by subject matter and highlighted the key points. I mean, but it was very helpful because it helped the issues coalesce, and you could almost make issue stacks with the emails, and you start to see those general themes rise up from the communications from the public. And so we're given flexibility there, but those are the benchmarks, and we put out at least one community forum because I think the board felt strongly that we wanted that in the policy. The next paragraph, that there's one sentence and then it's going to bleed over. This is the Boundary Adjustment Committee. The idea there is we can have one if we want one, but we don't have to have one. And part of that is as the district grows, it's a different animal, if you will. And we've talked about that a lot, and that things that were appropriate 10 years ago even might not necessarily be appropriate today. But it's there, and if the board decides that they want to make use of that for the particular project, then it's there and they can. One thing that we might consider here is, to me, I like the idea of, if the board has a boundary adjustment committee in place, add some language like exists for the administration, say that they're going to come to the board with options, not a single recommendation. They can present options and describe advantages and disadvantages of each one. I mean, it's not in this draft, but I think that is on my list of things we should talk about, because as I work through it, this last process, that's one of the things that bothered me, if you will, from not observing that process. I didn't get to see the end. I didn't get to see when they got down to their last handful of options, what were the advantages and disadvantages of each one, what decisions were to be made, and how did that work out. And when you are the ultimate decision maker, I think that's the very real discussion and the very real analysis that needs to be had. So that's why I think we should consider putting a statement in there about if a boundary adjustment committee is impaneled, that its job will be to present or to work with the administration to present options to the board. But anyway, flag that if you would, and you can give that some thought. And then the rest of it is grandfathering. Those are our traditional policies when we open a new high school or lower grade school, and then the fact that transportation is not historically going to be provided by the district for people who choose to grandfather, and then a standard emergency provision there.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So we don't have a full board here, but I do think that we've come a long way in the last 6 months on trying to capture all of the various comments that we've made. But I'd ask that if you have any questions today, but I'd like us to get to a point that in our July meeting that we go ahead and try to approve something. I think it's important for the community. I think it's important for us, as we're heard from Mr. Martindale earlier today. We're going to have some things that we need to be focusing on the next school year. And while this is extremely important, I feel like we have made a really strong effort to take in all the feedback that we've received and the experiences that we've had, and try to help push the district forward a little bit by actually having a policy that can be used by the administration, by the boards in the future, and also that the constituents have a better idea of how they can expect the boundary adjustment process to go in the future. Do you have any comments or things you'd like to add?
Yeah, I like what all this says, and I think regarding your charge to the BAC to bring back options, I don't think it's necessary to state that here. I think that if we do assign a boundary adjustment committee, I think we charge them at that time with what our expectations are. We may give them 3 options and say, come back to us with the option you think is best and why, rather than them bring us 3 options that we look at. So I don't know that we need to define exactly what we're going to ask of them here, because I think when the time comes, that might be different each time.
I think I agree with Mr. Williams, and I was going to ask Dr. Eagley from an administrative point of view.
Well, from a policy point of view, I just wanted to point out Board Policy BDB Local, which does talk about these ad hoc advisory committees. And a part of that is you guys approve the membership as a board, and you also approve the charter for that committee. And so, as Mr. Williams was talking about, that charter would indicate exactly the process you'd want them to use and the deliverables, if you will, of what you would want them to come out with. And so you would have that opportunity to do that, just as Mr. Williams said. I'm sorry, what was your question, Mr. Schaefer?
I agree with Mr. Williams. From your point of view on the Boundary Adjustment Committee, with what we had charged them, the options, what is your feeling on that? Since you're...
I think there's a great deal of value in having members of the community who are made up and live in various parts of the community look at various options and be a part of the process. They can be a part of the process in a number of ways. They can be a part of the process on the front end in developing scenarios and making recommendations or prioritizing recommendations. They can be involved at more of the middle or end of the scenario as somebody who is used by the board to bounce ideas off of. I think there's a number of ways in which their input can be valuable to the process. I think this policy, as its current iteration, does provide future boards, some flexibility in how to use ad hoc community groups, advisory groups like a boundary adjustment committee. And so I think one of the things that's important to note about this policy, this is about managing our enrollment, about managing our growth. And it's about being transparent and giving folks the opportunity to be a part of that process. And while we have that boundary adjustment committee option in here and in this current iteration, there's also opportunities for people to still be involved through community forums and through emails and through regular board meetings all throughout the process. So I think that's an important part that is included in this current version of this policy. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Mr. Chair, so you were talking more, you were saying something about tweaking the wording in it. Is there some,
Which part?
on the Boundary Adjustment Committee, I think I heard you say that, come back and, or did I misunderstand?
No. I mean, you definitely understood right, I think. But I think Quinn's point's well taken. I mean, you don't want to tie the board's hands on that, because it may very well be that it's, hey, we're down to these 3. What do you guys think?
I like that. I don't think that's...
I mean, that's right. Now, the other question that occurs to me is, would there ever be a need for, at the administrative level, to do that? I doubt it, but this policy, as written, doesn't contemplate when the administration is performing its analysis, getting that same type of community input. I don't know that you would want that, or that you particularly need that. That can come later as you go through the process, but
But what all we can control though is what we say board policy is going to be. I think that that's something that we could have a separate conversation of what does the administration do and how do they gather the information when they bring the various, but this is actually how is the board going to work going forward.
I do have a question, if that's okay. Back on page 2, Mr. Harris, let's see. Okay, yes, where it talks about facility utilization and an 85% and 110%. I've looked at this so many times, I can't believe I missed this. But the numbers that we initially talked about were 15 percentage points above or below the 100%. We talked about 85% and 115%. So I'm wondering if that's the number that that we needed to have in there, that was just an error, because one's 10% above and one's 15% below.
no. We had a discussion last time. One of us wanted to narrow the range down, instead of the 15 on either side, down to 10, for the utilization to have a more refined concept. And that, then, when we make it into a more of a notice provision or triggering the notice, what I did is took that draft that we had that had a bit of a hybrid of those and said, well, if we're talking about notifying or informing the board about this utilization, let's do it in such a way that triggers that notice sooner. So the greater amount of underutilization or the lower amount of overutilization.
Okay.
So that's why, because it would take longer if we extended it out to 115. And then the discussion of, are they arbitrary? I mean, you could 83.6%. Yeah, they're arbitrary.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we talked a little bit about the December, right? So every December, administration is going to do this, and we will get a report.
I think they're going to do the review, and we had talked, because it says they're going to review it, and the idea would be that they would come back probably in January and make because they have to get through the school year and make the evaluation.
So I think, so initially that month was January.
Yeah, that's
So
what
I started thinking about it. If we have to go into one of these facilities utilization options and we have to just make a change in 2 elementary school zones, we have to move some from one to the other. We probably want to get as much, we want to do that as early as possible to give as much notice as possible. So, and working as we do now with our demographers with more updates, I'm thinking it's possible for us to have those updates by the end of November, 1st December. On our October counts, be able to move a lot quicker. So if we can have that discussion and hopefully report to the board in December, if something needs to happen, like a slight boundary adjustment, then we can get going right after the beginning of the school year. So, beginning, not the school year, but beginning of the calendar year in January.
That also raises a good point. I mean, the previous iteration had implied that they would actually report their work to us.
in January, right?
Well, at all.
You just implied it.
Implied it. This actually states that they will report it to us.
And that is,
And shall present the results of such review to the board. And the idea there is that this is all transparent. I mean, so what the issues are, they're out there because anything that gets presented to us is in a very public way. So that we can, it's all out there for everyone to know what the issues are, what's coming. As we see things, like something enters the yellow zone and they report it, or something's at 80% utilization. Well, they're going to see that because they're going to inform us as part of that report. So it will be out there for everyone to see and to know, so that if we do have to move through the other options, whether it's facility utilization or alternative student enrollment options, they'll know the why in the background, and that it's not an arbitrary type decision, that these things
So the only thing that in regards to a particular month on the calendar is we changed it from every December, the administration will review, and compared to, we would hear a report in January. Basically, am I correct on
It
that?
was January, we were gonna review it, and it implied a report, but it didn't state it.
Okay.
Now it has every December that we're going to, I just say the administrative review facilities shall present the results of such review to the board. I assume that could be in December. If we had to go in January, I don't know that we're violating board policy there, but we will present and we shall present to the board the results of that.
Right, and to me, there's no magic. I mean, I think the idea is an annual review. I didn't make up December.
I did.
He did.
Okay.
So,
You made it up. You picked out the shoes, you wear them.
Okay, so just to summarize, you'll review it again. If you've got some points that you want to talk about next month, if you would send them to me so I can summarize them, so perhaps we can facilitate a rich discussion, but that we can go ahead and go forward with this and get something approved. I think that would be the way I'd like to try and go forward in July.
I think we have come a long way and it looks very good.
Appreciate that. I appreciate the work on this. I think it really reflects that conversation that we had, the rich conversation we had last month, and I think we've really moved the ball significantly down the field on this policy.
Good, thank you. So we'll move on to C3, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the school board policy update 108.
Thank you, Dr. Yokin. As you know, we get our board policy updated from time to time. Our policy services to the Texas Association of School Boards. We are now at policy update 108. It has been sent to you in transmittal for your review. This is simply a time for you to ask any questions or ask for us to provide information to you at a later time if we can answer it now. Our idea or desire is to have this for board approval at the regularly scheduled July meeting. So does anybody have any questions on any of the proposed policy updates in update 108?
I don't.
Okay. If you do, please let me know.
Okay, with that, we'll adjourn and we'll be back at
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.